I never thought buying a house in a quiet subdivision outside Charlotte, North Carolina would turn into a legal nightmare. But here I am, sitting in a courtroom because some HOA board president demanded I give her my heat pump, then sued me when I sent her a bill for the electricity she was using. My name is Logan Jenkins, and I work remotely as a software engineer. When I bought my 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Ridge Drive 2 years ago, the place seemed perfect. The neighborhood was peaceful. The commute to the city was manageable when I needed to go into the office, and the HOA fees were reasonable at $75 a month. I should have known something was off when the realtor glossed over the HOA rules during closing, but I was too excited about finally owning my own place to care. The trouble started last November when my heat pump died. I woke up one morning to a house that was 48 degrees inside, and when I called the HVAC guy, he delivered the bad news. The unit was 18 years old, and it would cost more to fix than replace. A new heat pump installation would run me about $8,000, and with winter approaching fast, I needed a solution immediately. That is when I made the decision that would change everything. I ordered a high-efficiency ductless mini-split system that could be installed on the exterior wall of my house. The outdoor compressor unit was about 3 feet by 2 feet, and it sat on a concrete pad just outside my living room window. It was not the prettiest thing in the world, but it was efficient, quiet, and most importantly, it kept my house warm. The installation took 2 days, and I was back to being comfortable in my own home. 3 days after the installation, I heard a sharp knock on my door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with Brenda Patterson, the president of the Maple Ridge HOA. She was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed middle management, and she wore a navy blue blazer despite it being a Saturday morning. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and she held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I am here about the unsightly mechanical equipment you have installed on the exterior of your property." I blinked at her. "You mean my heat pump? That monstrosity is a violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants. All mechanical equipment must be screened from view or installed in locations that are not visible from the street or neighboring properties." I stepped out onto my porch and looked at the unit. You could barely see it from the street because of the shrubs in my front yard, and it was on the side of my house that faced away from most of the neighbors. "Brenda, you can hardly see it, and I needed heat. My old system died." "The rules are the rules," she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my jaw clench. "You should have submitted an architectural review committee request before making any exterior modifications to your property. You now have 14 days to remove the equipment or screen it appropriately, or you will face a fine of $100 per day. Are you serious? It is November. I need heat." "That is not my problem, Mr. Jenkins. You chose to violate the covenants. I suggest you contact a landscaper about installing appropriate screening." She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, leaving me standing on my porch in disbelief. I spent the next week fuming about the interaction, but I also did not want to rack up daily fines. I called a landscaper who quoted me $1,200 to install privacy lattice and plant some evergreen shrubs around the unit. It was money I had not budgeted for, but I scheduled the work for the following week. 2 days before the landscaper was supposed to come out, Brenda showed up at my door again. This time, she was not alone. She had brought 2 other HOA board members with her, Thomas Werner, the treasurer, and Patricia Simmons, the secretary. All three of them stood on my porch looking official and serious. "Mr. Jenkins," Brenda began, "we have had several complaints from your neighbors about the noise from your heat pump unit." "What noise? That thing is nearly silent." "It is rated at 42 decibels, which is quieter than a normal conversation. Nevertheless, we have received complaints. I am here to inform you that the board has voted to require you to remove the unit entirely within 7 days. My hands balled into fists at my sides. "Remove it." "Brenda, that is my heat source. What am I supposed to do, freeze?" "You should have thought about that before installing non-approved equipment," she said. "The covenants are very clear. You can install a traditional HVAC system that meets community standards, or you can face escalating fines and potential legal action." "This is insane. I already scheduled a landscaper to screen the unit. That should satisfy the requirements." "The board has determined that screening is insufficient. The unit must be removed." She handed me an official letter on HOA letterhead outlining the board's decision and the timeline for compliance. After they left, I immediately called my real estate attorney, Marcus Fielding, who had handled my house closing. When I explained the situation, he sighed deeply. "Logan, HOAs have broad authority to enforce their covenants, but they also have to be reasonable. Let me review your HOA documents and the specific sections they are citing. In the meantime, do not remove the heat pump. You have a right to heat your home." Over the next several weeks, things escalated quickly. I received daily fine notices from the HOA, each one adding another $100 to my account. Marcus filed a response challenging the HOA's authority to require removal of essential home systems, and arguing that their enforcement was unreasonable and arbitrary. The HOA responded by placing a lien on my property for the unpaid fines. Then, in mid-December, things took a bizarre turn. I came home from a grocery run to find Brenda standing in my driveway with an HVAC technician. They were examining my heat pump unit, and the technician was taking measurements. "What are you doing?" I called out as I got out of my car. Brenda turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Jenkins, I am here to offer you a solution to our dispute. My own heat pump system failed yesterday, and my contractor says it will take 3 weeks to get a new system installed because of supply chain delays. Since you refuse to remove this unit anyway, I am going to have my technician relocate it to my property temporarily. You can install a proper HVAC system in the meantime, and everyone wins." I stared at her, genuinely unable to process what she had just said. "You want to take my heat pump, the one that is currently heating my house, temporarily relocate," she corrected. "Just until I can get my own system replaced. It is the neighborly thing to do, and it will resolve our compliance issues." "Absolutely not. That is insane, Brenda. You cannot just take someone's heating system." Her expression hardened. "I am trying to find a compromise here, Mr. Jenkins. If you are not willing to work with the board, then we will have no choice but to pursue more aggressive legal action." "Get off my property," I said, my voice low and controlled. "And if you or anyone you send comes near my heat pump again, I will call the police." Brenda's face flushed red. She said something to the technician, and they both got into their vehicles and left. I immediately called Marcus and told him what had happened. "She wants to take your heat pump," Marcus repeated, his tone incredulous. "Logan, I have been practicing real estate law for 23 years, and I have never heard anything like this. Document everything. If she comes back, call the police and call me." I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated Brenda's determination. 3 days later, I left my house at 8 in the morning to meet a client for breakfast in Charlotte. When I returned at 11, my heat pump was gone. The outdoor unit had been disconnected and removed, leaving only the concrete pad and some disconnected electrical wiring. I stood in my driveway, staring at the empty space where my heating system had been, feeling a cold rage building in my chest. I went inside and confirmed what I already knew. The indoor units were not working. My house was already starting to cool down. I called the police first. Officer Daniels arrived 30 minutes later and took my report. He walked around the property, photographed the disconnected wiring, and took notes. "This is definitely theft," he said. "Do you have any idea who might have taken it?" I told him about Brenda and the HOA dispute, including her request 3 days earlier to temporarily relocate my unit. Officer Daniels raised his eyebrows. "And she is the HOA president. Let me get her information from you." He took down Brenda's name and address, which was only 4 streets over from mine. "I will go talk to her. In the meantime, I recommend you change your locks and consider installing security cameras." After Officer Daniels left, I called Marcus, who was apoplectic. "She stole your heat pump." "Logan, this is criminal. This is not just an HOA dispute anymore. File a police report, which you already did, and then we are going to file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and injunctive relief. We are also going to sue her personally, not just the HOA." I spent the rest of the day dealing with the fallout. I called my insurance company, who said the theft would be covered under my homeowner's policy, minus the deductible. I called HVAC companies trying to get someone to come out immediately, but everyone was booked solid for at least a week. I ended up buying 3 space heaters from Home Depot just to keep my bedroom and office warm enough to function. That evening, Officer Daniels called me back. "Mr. Jenkins, I went to Miss Patterson's residence. Your heat pump is installed at her house. She claims that she had authorization from the HOA board to remove non-compliant equipment from properties in violation of covenants, and that she planned to store the unit until you came into compliance. That is complete nonsense. She stole my heating system because hers broke down." "Did you arrest her?" I explained to her that removing property from someone's home without their permission is theft, regardless of any HOA authority. "She has agreed to have the unit returned to your property tomorrow morning. If she does not follow through, we can pursue criminal charges." "I want to pursue charges anyway. She stole my heat pump." "That is your right, Mr. Jenkins. I will forward this report to the district attorney's office, but I am going to strongly encourage you to have your unit reinstalled and secured, and get those cameras up." The next morning, Brenda showed up at my house with the same HVAC technician from before and a truck carrying my heat pump unit. I watched from my porch as they reinstalled it, photographing and videoing everything. Brenda would not look at me or speak to me. When the technician finished reconnecting everything and confirmed the system was operational, Brenda got in her SUV and drove away without a word. I immediately called the HVAC company she had used and spoke with the technician, whose name was Jeff. "I need you to document exactly what happened here. You removed my unit from my property 3 days ago and reinstalled it today, correct?" Jeff looked uncomfortable. "Look, man, I was just following orders. Miss Patterson said she had authorization and that this was part of an HOA enforcement action. She paid me to move the unit, and then yesterday the cops showed up at my shop asking questions. She called me last night and paid me again to move it back. I do not want any trouble." "Did she tell you her heat pump was broken?" Jeff hesitated. "Yeah. She had me install your unit at her house temporarily, said her system was down and she needed heat. So she lied to you about having authorization to take someone's property." "I am not mad at you, Jeff, but I need you to be willing to testify to this if it goes to court." He nodded reluctantly. "If I get subpoenaed, I will tell the truth, but I do not want to be in the middle of this." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus filed multiple legal actions. We sued Brenda personally for theft, conversion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also filed claims against the HOA for harassment and abuse of authority. Marcus filed for a temporary restraining order preventing Brenda or any HOA representative from coming onto my property or interfering with my heat pump. The HOA fired back with their own lawsuit, claiming I had violated the covenants and seeking to force me to remove the heat pump and pay the accumulated fines, which were now over $15,000. The legal battle consumed my life for the next month. I had to take time off work for depositions, meetings with Marcus, and court appearances. The stress was affecting my sleep and my ability to focus on my job, but I was not going to back down. Brenda had crossed a line that went way beyond HOA petness. The preliminary hearing for the restraining order was held in early January. Brenda showed up with the HOA's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Klein who specialized in real estate law. I sat with Marcus at our table, watching as Brenda took the stand. Under oath, she maintained that she had authority under the HOA covenants to remove non-compliant equipment from properties. She claimed that she had planned to store my heat pump unit, not use it herself, and that it was merely a coincidence that she had installed it at her own home. "Miss Patterson," Marcus said during cross-examination, "is it true that your own heat pump system failed on December 10th? "Yes, that is correct." "And is it true that you attempted to convince Mr. Jenkins to let you take his heat pump on December 12th, 2 days after yours failed?" "I offered a compromise solution that would have benefited both parties. A compromise where you would have heat and he would not." Brenda's face flushed. "I suggested he could install a proper system in the middle of winter while you used his heating system. And when he refused, you had his unit stolen from his property and installed at your house, correct?" "I exercised my authority as HOA president to enforce community standards." Marcus pulled out a photograph. "This is a picture taken at your residence on December 15th, 3 days after Mr. Jenkins refused your request. That is Mr. Jenkins' heat pump unit installed and running at your home, is it not?" "That is the non-compliant unit, yes, providing heat to your home." Brenda pressed her lips together. "It was being temporarily stored." "Stored? Miss Patterson, the unit was fully connected to your home's electrical system and actively heating your residence." "How is that storage?" Richard Klein objected and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Catherine Moore, looked at Brenda with barely concealed skepticism. When I took the stand, I explained the entire timeline, from my initial installation of the heat pump to Brenda's demand that I remove it, to her attempt to take it, to the theft. I presented the police report, photographs, and Jeff the technician's written statement. Judge Moore granted the temporary restraining order. Brenda was prohibited from coming within 100 feet of my property or interfering with my heating system in any way. She also ordered the HOA to cease all fine accumulation pending resolution of the underlying dispute about whether the heat pump installation violated the covenants. This court finds the removal of Mr. Jenkins' heating system to be deeply troubling, Judge Moore said from the bench. Regardless of any HOA authority, removing essential systems from someone's home in the middle of winter is both dangerous and potentially criminal. The temporary restraining order will remain in effect until the full hearing, which is scheduled for March 15th. As we left the courtroom, Brenda glared at me with pure hatred in her eyes. Richard Klein pulled her aside and spoke to her in low, urgent tones. I could tell he was not happy with how the hearing had gone. Marcus and I grabbed lunch at a diner near the courthouse to discuss strategy. "The restraining order is a good start," he said, "but we still have a long fight ahead. The HOA is going to argue that you violated the covenants, and technically, you did install the unit without prior approval. We need to prove that their enforcement is arbitrary, and that requiring you to remove essential equipment is unreasonable. What about the criminal charges against Brenda? The DA's office is reviewing the case. Officer Daniels told me they are taking it seriously, but they want to see how the civil case plays out first. If we can prove in civil court that Brenda stole your property for her own use, it strengthens the criminal case significantly." 2 weeks after the hearing, I received something in the mail that made my blood boil. It was a bill from Duke Energy, the local power company, but it was not my normal bill. This was a notice that my electric meter had recorded unusually high usage during the period of December 15th through December 18th, when my heat pump had been stolen and installed at Brenda's house. I called Duke Energy and explained the situation. The customer service representative I spoke with was confused at first, but when I explained that someone had stolen my heat pump and used it at another location while it was still connected to my meter somehow, she transferred me to a supervisor. "Mr. Jenkins," the supervisor, a woman named Michelle, said, "I have pulled up your account. Your meter did show elevated usage during those dates, but the meter is at your property address. Are you saying someone removed equipment from your property, but it was still drawing power from your meter?" I thought about it and realized what must have happened. "No, wait. Let me check something. Can you tell me if there were any new service connections at 847 Oakmont Circle during that time period?" That was Brenda's address. There was typing on the other end of the line. I cannot give out information about other customer accounts, but I can tell you that if you believe someone used your equipment at another location and you were billed for that usage, you should file a dispute. I thanked her and called Marcus immediately. I think I know what happened. When Jeff the technician installed my heat pump at Brenda's house, he must have connected it to her electrical system. She was using my equipment and paying for the electricity, or at least it was running through her meter. "That is good for us," Marcus said. "It proves she was using your property for her own benefit, not storing it. But why did you get a high usage bill?" I thought about it more. Maybe the bill is just showing my usage during that time when I was running space heaters constantly trying to keep my house warm. Those things eat electricity. But that did not sit right with me. I went back through my Duke Energy account online and compared my usage to previous months. The usage was higher, but not dramatically so given that I had been running multiple space heaters. Then I noticed something strange. There was a second meter reading listed on my account for those dates. I called Duke Energy back and asked to speak with Michelle again. When I explained what I had found, she put me on hold for several minutes. When she came back, her voice was serious. "Mr. Jenkins, it appears there was an error in how your account was configured during that time period. I am seeing notes here that someone called our customer service line on December 14th, requesting a temporary service connection at a secondary location using your account number. Is that something you authorized?" My jaw dropped. "Absolutely not. Who called?" "I cannot give you that information without a subpoena, but I can tell you the request was made and approved. The temporary connection was installed at the secondary location on December 15th and remained active until December 18th. You were billed for all electricity used at that location during that time. How is that even possible? How can someone just call and have my electric account connected to a different address? It should not be possible without proper verification, Mr. Jenkins. I am flagging this as a fraudulent service request and opening an investigation. You will not be charged for the electricity used at the secondary location. I am very sorry this happened. After I hung up, I immediately called Marcus and told him everything. He was silent for a long moment. Logan, this is huge. Brenda did not just steal your heat pump. She committed utility fraud by having your electric account connected to her address, so you would pay for the electricity while she used your equipment. That is a serious crime. Can we prove it was her? Duke Energy's investigation should reveal who called in the service request. If it was Brenda, or if she put someone up to it, we have her on multiple crimes now. I am going to call the district attorney's office and Officer Daniels right away. The next month was a whirlwind of legal activity. Duke Energy's investigation revealed that the fraudulent service request had been called in from Brenda's cell phone. She had used my account number, which she had obtained from HOA records that included utility account information for lien purposes, and had convinced the Duke Energy representative that she was calling on my behalf to set up temporary service during an HVAC repair. The DA's office charged Brenda with theft, utility fraud, and identity fraud. Officer Daniels arrested her at her home on a Tuesday morning, and the whole neighborhood watched as she was led out in handcuffs. The story made the local news, and suddenly, everyone in the subdivision was talking about the HOA president who stole someone's heat pump. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Brenda as president. Thomas Werner took over as interim president and immediately reached out to Marcus to discuss settling the HOA's lawsuit against me. My board and I want you to know that we had no knowledge of Miss Patterson's actions, Thomas said during a conference call with Marcus and me. What she did was criminal and completely outside the scope of her authority as HOA president. We are willing to drop all fines and our lawsuit against you if you are willing to drop your claims against the HOA itself. What about Brenda personally? I asked. We cannot speak for Miss Patterson. She has retained her own attorney for the criminal charges. Our insurance carrier has denied coverage for her actions because they were criminal in nature, so she is on her own for your civil claims against her. Marcus and I discussed it and agreed to the settlement with the HOA. I was willing to install some screening around the heat pump unit as a gesture of good faith, and in exchange, the HOA would formally approve my installation and waive all accumulated fines. The HOA also agreed to update their enforcement procedures to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. The civil case against Brenda personally moved forward. In March, we went to trial on my claims for theft, conversion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brenda's attorney tried to argue that she had genuinely believed she had authority to remove non-compliant equipment, and that the utility fraud was a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jeff the technician testified about how Brenda had hired him to move my heat pump to her house, and had told him her own system was broken. Duke Energy representatives testified about the fraudulent service request made from Brenda's phone. Officer Daniels testified about finding my heat pump actively heating Brenda's home. I testified about the entire ordeal and the stress it had caused me. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict in my favor. They awarded me $12,000 in compensatory damages for the cost of the replacement heat pump I had to install temporarily, the space heaters, increased electricity costs, and other expenses. They also awarded me $50,000 in punitive damages, finding that Brenda's conduct was willful and malicious. Brenda's face was pale as the verdict was read. Her attorney immediately indicated they would appeal, but Marcus was confident the verdict would stand. The criminal trial happened 2 months later. Brenda was found guilty of theft and utility fraud. The identity fraud charge was dropped as part of a plea negotiation, but she was sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended to 6 months of actual jail time followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution to me and to Duke Energy for their investigation costs. Standing in that courtroom and watching Brenda be sentenced was surreal. This woman who had been so confident in her authority, who had felt entitled to take my property because I had dared to install a heat pump without her permission, was now a convicted criminal facing jail time. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with Marcus. The spring air was warm and I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, exhausted, but relieved. This whole thing has been insane. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just backed down." HOAs have a lot of power, but they do not have the right to steal from homeowners or abuse their authority. Hopefully, this case will make other HOA boards think twice before they overstep. I went home to my house on Maple Ridge Drive, where my heat pump was still running efficiently and was now properly screened by the landscaping I had installed. The neighborhood was quieter now, without Brenda driving around looking for covenant violations. Thomas Werner was doing a decent job as HOA president, and the board had implemented new oversight procedures to prevent any one person from having too much unchecked authority. Duke Energy had credited my account for all the fraudulent charges, plus an additional credit as an apology for their customer service failure in allowing the fraudulent service request. The civil judgment against Brenda would take time to collect, but Marcus had already begun garnishment proceedings against her bank accounts and her property. I installed security cameras around my house, which I probably should have done from the beginning. The footage had proven invaluable during the legal proceedings, showing exactly when Jeff had shown up to remove my heat pump and when he had returned to reinstall it. My job had been understanding throughout the ordeal, but I was glad to finally be able to focus on work again without constant meetings with lawyers and court appearances. I had learned a valuable lesson about HOAs and the importance of documenting everything and not backing down when someone abuses their authority. Several of my neighbors reached out to apologize for not speaking up during the dispute. A few of them admitted they had seen Brenda become increasingly controlling over the past year, but had been afraid to challenge her. Now, with new leadership and better oversight, the HOA was actually functioning the way it was supposed to, maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable standards without harassment. I thought about selling the house and moving somewhere without an HOA, but ultimately decided to stay. This was my home, and I had fought too hard to keep my heat pump to give up now. Plus, property values in the neighborhood had actually increased once word spread that the tyrannical HOA president was gone. The weirdest part of the whole experience was becoming a minor local celebrity. The story of the HOA president who stole someone's heat pump had been picked up by regional news outlets and even some national media. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the importance of understanding your rights as a homeowner and not being intimidated by HOA boards that overreach their authority. 6 months after Brenda was sentenced, I ran into Thomas Werner at the neighborhood pool. He told me that Brenda had sold her house at a significant loss and moved out of state after serving her jail time. Her probation had been transferred to wherever she had relocated. The new owners of her house seemed nice and were not involved in the HOA board at all. "We have learned a lot from this situation," Thomas said. "The board is implementing mandatory training for all members about legal limitations on HOA authority and proper enforcement procedures. We are also requiring any enforcement actions over a certain dollar amount to be approved by a majority of the board, not just the president acting alone." "That sounds like a good idea," I said. "I never wanted to be in a war with the HOA. I just wanted to heat my house." "I know. And for what it is worth, I am sorry we let Brenda's behavior get so out of control. Several of us on the board were uncomfortable with how aggressive she was getting, but we did not want to rock the boat. We should have stood up to her sooner." I appreciated his apology, even if it did not undo the months of stress and legal bills I had endured. Marcus had recovered most of his fees from the settlement and judgment, but the emotional toll had been significant. Looking back on the whole situation, I still find it hard to believe that a dispute over a heat pump escalated to theft, utility fraud, criminal charges, and a civil trial. But it taught me that HOAs, despite being common in American neighborhoods, can become vehicles for petty tyranny when the wrong people get into positions of authority. I also learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it would be easier to just give in. If I had removed my heat pump when Brenda first demanded it, I would have spent thousands of dollars installing a different system while having no heat during the coldest part of winter. And Brenda would have continued to abuse her authority against other homeowners, confident that no one would challenge her. Instead, she was held accountable for her actions. She lost her position, her reputation, her freedom temporarily, and a significant amount of money. More importantly, the HOA system in our neighborhood was reformed to prevent future abuses. My heat pump is still running perfectly, keeping my house comfortable year-round. Every time I adjust the thermostat, I think about that crazy period when someone actually stole my heating system and tried to justify it as HOA enforcement. It seems absurd now, but it really happened. I still get occasional emails from people who heard about my case and are dealing with their own HOA disputes. I always tell them the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they hide behind official titles and organizational authority. The landscaping around my heat pump has grown in nicely over the past year. The evergreen shrubs are thick and healthy, providing plenty of screening while still allowing airflow for the unit to function efficiently. It is actually an improvement to my yard, and several neighbors have complimented the landscaping. I probably would have installed something similar eventually anyway, but I am glad I did it on my own terms rather than under threat of fines and harassment. My relationship with the HOA is fine now. I pay my dues on time, follow the reasonable rules, and participate in neighborhood events. Thomas Werner has been a fair and reasonable president, and the board seems to have learned from the disaster that was Brenda's tenure. They still enforce the covenants, but they do it with common sense and respect for homeowners' rights. I sometimes wonder what Brenda is doing now, wherever she ended up. I hope she learned something from the experience, though I have my doubts. People who feel that entitled to control others rarely change their fundamental nature. But at least she is not terrorizing homeowners in my neighborhood anymore. The final chapter of the saga came almost exactly a year after the initial incident. Marcus called to tell me that we had finally collected the full judgment amount from Brenda through garnishment of her wages and the proceeds from the sale of her house. After Marcus took his remaining fees and costs, I received a check for $48,000. It was a significant amount of money, and while I was glad to have it, I would have preferred never to have gone through the ordeal in the first place. I used some of the money to upgrade my home security system and to build an emergency fund. The rest I invested, figuring it was at least a silver lining to a stressful situation. I also made a donation to a local legal aid society that helps homeowners dealing with HOA disputes who cannot afford attorneys. I had been fortunate enough to have the resources to hire Marcus and fight back, but many homeowners do not have that option. If my experience could help others stand up to HOA abuse, then at least something good came from it. Life has settled into a comfortable routine now. I work from my home office. My house is always at a comfortable temperature thanks to my properly screened and HOA-approved heat pump. And I no longer dread seeing the HOA president's car in my driveway. The whole experience feels like a bad dream, except for the tangible evidence. The court documents, the news articles, and the upgraded security system that records everything that happens on my property. I have become much more careful about understanding my rights and responsibilities as a homeowner. I read through the entire HOA covenant document, all 67 pages of it, and I attend HOA meetings regularly now. I figure the best way to prevent future problems is to stay informed and involved in how the organization operates. The neighborhood itself has improved under the new HOA leadership. Common areas are better maintained, the pool and clubhouse have been updated, and there is less conflict between the board and homeowners. It turns out that when an HOA focuses on actually managing the community, rather than wielding power over residents, everyone benefits. I have also become something of an informal resource for neighbors who have questions about HOA rules or who are concerned about potential violations. I am always careful to encourage people to work things out reasonably and to save legal action as a last resort. But I also tell them not to let themselves be bullied or intimidated, and to document everything just in case. Several neighbors have thanked me for standing up to Brenda. Apparently, I was not the only person she had targeted with aggressive enforcement actions. Others had received similar threats about fines and liens over minor issues. Most had just given in and done whatever she demanded, even when it cost them money and seemed unreasonable. Knowing that someone had finally held her accountable gave them a sense of justice, even if it came too late to help them directly. The case also had ripples beyond our neighborhood. The local media coverage sparked conversations about HOA reform and accountability. Some state legislators even proposed new laws to provide better protections for homeowners and to limit HOA enforcement powers. I do not know if any of those proposals will actually become law, but at least people are talking about the issue. Marcus told me he has had several new clients come to him with HOA disputes, specifically mentioning my case as the reason they reached out. He said most of those disputes have been settled quickly, once the HOAs realized the homeowners had competent legal representation and were serious about defending their rights. Just the threat of ending up like Brenda, publicly embarrassed and criminally charged, has been enough to make most HOA boards more reasonable. I have no regrets about fighting back, despite the stress and time it consumed. Brenda crossed a line when she stole my heat pump, and she compounded that crime by fraudulently using my electric account. She deserved to face consequences for her actions, and I am glad I was in a position to hold her accountable. Every winter when I turn on my heat and feel the warm air flowing from the vents, I think about that cold morning when I discovered my system had been stolen. It seems almost comical now, The absurdity of an HOA president actually removing someone's heating equipment and installing it at her own house. But it was not funny at the time. It was a violation of my home and my security, and it could have been dangerous if I had not been able to afford space heaters and alternative heating sources. The experience has made me a stronger advocate for homeowner rights and a more informed consumer when it comes to HOAs. If I ever move again, I will think long and hard about whether I want to buy in an HOA community, and if I do, I will thoroughly research the board and their history of enforcement actions. For now, though, I am happy in my house on Maple Ridge Drive. The neighborhood is quiet, my heat pump runs efficiently, and I have peace of mind knowing that the tyrannical HOA president who tried to steal my heating system is gone and will not be coming back. Justice was served, lessons were learned, and life goes on. The whole saga taught me that the system works, at least eventually, when you are willing to stand up for yourself, and you have the resources to do so. The courts took my complaint seriously. The police investigated properly, and the jury saw through Brenda's attempts to justify her theft as HOA enforcement. The criminal justice system held her accountable, and the civil system compensated me for my losses. But it also taught me that these protections are only meaningful if you are willing to use them. If I had been too intimidated to fight back, or if I could not have afforded a good attorney, Brenda would have gotten away with stealing my property. She would have continued abusing her authority, and other homeowners would have suffered. Sometimes standing up to bullies is not just about protecting yourself, but about protecting everyone who comes after you. I hope anyone reading about my experience takes away the lesson that HOA authority has limits, and that those limits are enforced by law. No HOA board member has the right to steal your property, commit fraud, or abuse their position. And if they do, you have legal recourse. Document everything, know your rights, get good legal advice, and do not back down when you are in the right. My heat pump is still keeping me comfortable as I write this, and I am grateful every day for the warmth and security of my home. The battle to defend that comfort was exhausting and stressful, but it was worth it. Brenda tried to take something essential from me, and instead she lost everything. That is justice, plain and simple.